SynOrganics Design and Engineering Hub creates next-generation technology. Their work is often controversial. This is the Test Kitchen.
When Anais approached me with her concerns, I realized we might not have fully understood the social dynamics, I guess, of what we were unleashing. Yes, the offenders themselves seemed to laugh it off, but some of them even were reveling in the attention, like that their notoriety was bringing them. I remember reading one even add his own line of bobblehead dolls and a six-figure deal with Mattel for an action figure. But you could tell that some of them did not quite grasp that this was permanent, even though they signed the waiver and it was explained to them, but they viewed this scarlet letter as a badge of defiance at some point, and it was almost this tribal reaction that blinded us. We had actually made them a tighter knit group that took on this me against the world attitude.
When the Amygdalae Corporation got involved, that caught us off guard. They poured millions into a campaign designed to discredit SynOrganics, essentially turning a legal and ethical debate into something far more charged. This was vindictive, and it wasn't a secret that McDonnelly had an axe to grind with Coy. This was a smear campaign.
I'd like to know how many of these Firefly critics have ever been afraid to walk alone at night or have ever been assaulted. Have they ever wondered if that person staring at them was a rapist or someone who might assault them? And that person who wants to buy them a drink, can you trust them? Knowing that someone has a violent background, that's a big win. And knowing that these violent people are out there, I feel like I can breathe a hell of a lot easier. Thank you, Firefly. Thank you, SynOrganics.
The honeymoon lasted about 2 weeks. And what was revealed were these unanticipated consequences that just raised questions. Were we solving a problem or creating a new one? Prevention seemed to be paving the way for violence. It was almost as if by identifying violent offenders, that gave people the license to take matters into their own hands. And here's a very sad example of this. A man who had just been released from prison, time passes, he's turned his life around, has gotten married, had his first child, found a new job, and he was chased down and beaten to death because people made an assumption he was glowing and he was up to no good. Preventing violent crime, oddly enough, only seemed to be breeding more violence. We were perplexed.
That Firefly really opened up a can of worms because it was such a complex, morally, initiative. You could tell we were hitting a nerve. Obviously, these were with the individuals who had a past, and some of them wanted to continue with that violent past, and others had moved on and gotten their life together, and they saw the unfairness, which makes sense. And then on the other side, you've got victims who are thanking their personal gods because now there's a visual deterrent. So there are no easy answers, and you're always going to have critics, and we're used to that.
I get the whole stigmata thing, the argument that they throw out. But what about me? I was the one rigged. Do you understand the kind of stigma that carries? Do you think the fools who claimed I somehow caused this by how I dressed would get them? I never hurt anyone. They did. If these monsters experienced what I went through, they'd fucking understand.
Here's the thing. Once you've labeled someone by altering their physical appearance, you have essentially cast them out of society. Jobs, housing, relationships, that's all gone. And the stigma that follows them, that's forever. So even if they've served their time, even if they've shown genuine remorse, it's almost irrelevant. And I think to some people, that approach came across as just being a little too vindictive.
I think I began to second guess myself when I spoke to Anna East, and she had casually mentioned or suggested, where does that leave us if we are being part of who should be labeled or identified with a scarlet letter? Where does that leave us as a society when you open that door and start defining labels? And I thought back quite a while ago, I had read a book called Ordinary Men, and I believe the author's name was Christopher Browning, I think. And he talked about how changing the rules of acceptable behavior allowed for heinous acts to occur and not be questioned. And he focused on policemen and security guards who in the 30s were drawn into this, having to enforce these policies in Germany. And before they know it, they're taking part in the Holocaust. And that behavior was acceptable because over time they had changed what was acceptable. And I could very easily see how identifying people like that visually was a slippery slope. I really had to do a lot of thinking.
I interviewed a career criminal who was pardoned for a violent crime against a black teenager. And he was a self-proclaimed supremacist who was frustrated because he was having trouble buying a home. Realtors refused to work with him when they saw the color of his skin. And he told me, they want to judge me by the way I look. My money is as good as anyone else's. And the irony seemed to be totally lost on him. Firefly didn't just expose his crimes. It forced him to experience the same kind of judgment and exclusion he had spent a lifetime cultivating and practicing on other people who didn't look like him. And I think there's a benefit to this that we need to consider.
Firefly didn't just mark people. It defined them. Once you glow, you're no longer a person. You're a warning, a danger, another mistake waiting to happen. One man told me, he said, what's the point of applying for a job? Because the glow speaks for me before I can. And he wasn't wrong. Society didn't see fireflies as people trying to rehabilitate themselves. They only saw threats. It wasn't just a warning. It was a sentence, a life sentence. How can anyone hope to rebuild their life with that kind of judgment?
Don't forget to like, subscribe, and sign up for notifications so you don't miss any stories. Thanks for watching.